Welcome to the Fantasy Audiobook Library, a sanctuary of stories where fan fictions come alive, where ancient legends echo from the East and Western worlds awaken with wonder. Settle in. Your journey begins now.
DxD. I Steal Luck Chapter 1 Chapter 1. High School DxD. Kuo Town. Inside one of the classrooms at Kuo Academy, a second-year student sat quietly among his peers, his gaze blank as if lost in another world. While his classmates listened attentively to the lecture, his expression stood out, a mix of shock, confusion, and disbelief. Did I transmigrate? Blake Silva muttered under his breath, his fingers gripping the desk as a flood of unfamiliar memories poured into his mind. The name remained the same, Blake Silva. But everything else, completely different. In his previous life, he had black hair, dark eyes, and an utterly forgettable appearance. Just another high school student, an orphan with no remarkable background or future prospects. But now, his reflection in the window told a different story. Silver hair, crystal blue eyes, and features so sharp they looked like they belonged to a fantasy novel protagonist. His new appearance radiated both charm and aloofness, an ethereal beauty that felt almost unreal. More than that, his entire identity had changed. He was now the eldest son of the Silva family, one of the most prestigious magician clans in the world. But instead of being revered, he was considered an outcast. The Silva bloodline had always produced descendants with black hair and dark eyes, a sign of their magical heritage. His silver hair and blue eyes. A mutation. An anomaly. An aberration. Worse, his talent in magic arts was deemed mediocre at best, a disgrace to the family name. So, under the guise of an education opportunity, his family sent him away to Kuo Academy, a school in Japan that was, at best, a convenient excuse to remove him from their affairs. The only one who ever cared about him was his younger sister, Leah Silva. But none of that was the real issue. Wait. Kuo Town. Kuo Academy. Blake's pupils contracted. The names sounded far too familiar. Digging through his memories, he found pieces that made his heart race. Then it hit him. No way. Kuo Academy. Isn't this the school where the protagonist and heroines from High School DxD are enrolled? A shiver ran down his spine. He needed confirmation. He closed his eyes, concentrating on every memory of this world. The Silva family's archives did mention supernatural beings. Devils, fallen angels, vampires, dragons, all of them. And his own personal memories held images of Rias Grimori, Akano Himahima, and Kaneko Tuju, names that shouldn't exist outside of fiction. Slowly, he exhaled. Holy hell. This really is High School DxD. Blake leaned back in his seat, staring at the ceiling. Of all the places to end up in, why this one? This wasn't some generic fantasy world where he could leisurely grow stronger. This was a battlefield where gods, devils, and dragons clashed. A world where dying was incredibly easy. Should I be excited, or terrified? Forcing himself to calm down, he reviewed what advantages he had. His current strength, despite being considered a disappointment by his family, he wasn't completely helpless. Point 1. Magic arts. His knowledge of spells and magical techniques was extensive, though his practical ability was nothing outstanding. His family's strict oversight and his own lack of natural talent meant he was still far from being an elite magician. Point 2. Perceptual distortion. His unique ability allowed him to distort the perception of speed. Rather than actually moving faster, it made his opponents think he was moving at an impossible speed, similar to Racer's magic from Fairy Tail. While it didn't increase his physical capabilities, it could completely throw off an enemy's sense of time. Point 3. Magic swordsmanship. Unlike traditional swordsmanship, this style wasn't based on pure strength or agility but instead used magical energy to enhance each strike. He could channel spells directly through his blade, giving his attacks supernatural properties, and he had great affinity in swords. With these, I should be able to handle low-class devils and ordinary humans, but anything stronger, I'd be screwed. He wasn't a devil, fallen angel, or dragon. He wasn't the protagonist of High School DxD with a powerful sacred gear or divine bloodline. If he wanted to survive, he needed more power. As he pondered his next move, a strange ding echoed in his mind. Ding. Host has successfully integrated into this world. Activating the luck plunder system. 1%. 36%, 78%, 99%, 100%. A soft, melodic voice followed. Activation complete. Greetings, Master. I am Sia, the spirit of the luck plunder system. It's a pleasure to serve you. Blake blinked. Then, his lips curled into a slow, devilish grin. Now this is more like it. A system. This just went from difficult mode to potentially broken. He quickly gathered his thoughts, communicating through his mind rather than speaking aloud. Because let's be real, shouting into the air like some cliché protagonist was not his style. Sia. Explain the system's functions. With this, things were about to get interesting. Chapter 2. The system's functions. A calm, almost serene voice echoed in Blake's mind. Master, allow me to explain the primary functions of your system. Sia's tone was smooth and confident, with no hesitation, almost like an advanced AI rather than a mystical entity. Blake, still adjusting to his new reality, focused intently. If this system was anything like the ones in novels and games, it could completely change his fate. Currently, the system consists of several key features: luck plunder, luck points, lottery, dimensional travel, the quest system, and others that will unlock as your power grows. Each word sent a thrill through Blake. The sheer potential of these functions was staggering. Point 1. Luck plunder. Sia continued in her steady, matter-of-fact tone. First, we have luck plunder. This function allows you to steal the luck of others. Blake's expression sharpened. By diminishing someone's luck, you can cause various misfortunes to befall them. If their luck reaches 0, she paused slightly. They will experience an untimely death, with no clear explanation. Blake inhaled slowly. So, I can literally kill someone by draining their luck to nothing. That was unsettling. This wasn't just about gaining an edge in battle. This was a life-altering, possibly world-breaking ability. A transparent screen appeared in his mind. Luck plunder level 1. Effect. Steal 20 to 50 points of luck per use. Cooldown. Once every 3 days can be stored. Target limit. A person can only be plundered once per day. Higher levels unlock stronger effects. Luck is such an abstract force, but if it really works the way Sia says, Blake clenched his fist. This wasn't just a powerful ability, it was dangerous. Luck influenced everything. Survival, success, even the smallest coincidences. The idea that he could twist fate itself. I'll have to be careful with this. 2. Luck points and lottery system. Next, we have luck points, Sia continued. This is the currency of the system. You can use these points for a variety of functions, such as drawing from the system's lotteries, enhancing your physical abilities, or even copying skills from others. Blake's interest spiked. A list of functions appeared before him. Luck points usage. Low-level lottery. 30 points per draw. Mid-level lottery. 200 points per draw. High-level lottery. 2000 points per draw. Enhance physical abilities. Varies based on effect. Steal or replicate skills. Basic skill plundering. 30 points 80% success rate. Intermediate skill plundering. 200 points 50% success rate. Advanced skill plundering. 2000 points 10% success rate. Blake's eyes gleamed. I can literally steal or copy skills from others. That's insane. Though the higher tier skills had ridiculously low success rates, it still meant that nothing was out of reach. Even if he wasn't born with god-tier talents, he could take them from others. The lottery is tempting, but skill plundering, that's where the real power lies. 3. Dimensional travel. Sia's tone shifted slightly, as if introducing something truly game-changing. The dimensional travel feature allows you to visit alternate worlds. Blake's breath hitched. You can enter one once a week, with the difficulty of the world matching your current strength. Alternatively, you can pay additional points to select a world with a higher difficulty. A rush of excitement coursed through him. I can actually travel to other dimensions. Dimensional travel difficulty levels. Beginner world. 30 points. Intermediate world. 100 points. Advanced world. 500 points. Additional features. Time dilation. Adjust the time flow in alternate worlds requires extra points. The implications were massive. Not only could he grow stronger outside of this world, but time dilation meant he could train for months or years in another dimension without wasting real-world time. This system just keeps getting better. 4. Quest system. The quest system will unlock as you grow stronger, Sia informed him. Once active, it will provide you with tasks that yield rewards such as luck points, magical items, or even new abilities. This was fairly standard, but extremely useful. Quests meant consistent power-ups. If done right, he could snowball his growth exponentially. A self-sustaining loop of getting stronger. I love it. 5. Scanning ability. Finally, there is the scanning ability. A new function. Blake listened carefully. This feature allows you to analyze your targets, giving you insight into their strengths, weaknesses, and magical capabilities. Blake's eyes narrowed. This is basically an RPG stat check function. Perfect for scouting enemies. In a world full of supernatural threats, having intel on his opponents before a fight could be the difference between victory and death. Blake leaned back, exhaling slowly. The sheer potential of his system was overwhelming. Luck manipulation, skill plundering, world travel, stat boosts, and intelligence gathering. This wasn't just an advantage. This was a path to absolute power. Still, it wasn't instant. He needed time, strategy, and a solid plan. Sia's voice turned cheerful. Ah, Master, before I forget, I have something for you to help you get started. Before he could ask what, a gift box materialized in front of him, floating elegantly in the air. With a touch, the box burst open in a flash of light, revealing a single ancient book. This is the Ether Energy Training Manual, Sia announced. With this, you will learn to harness ether energy, a unique, adaptable power source that can be shaped into any type of magic. Blake's pulse quickened. Elemental control, barrier magic, even time manipulation. Ether energy can seamlessly integrate into any magic system without loss in quality. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up the book. A high-level magic system. This is exactly what I need. As soon as he opened it, knowledge flooded his mind. He could already feel the foundations of ether energy forming within him. This wasn't just a boost, it was a transformation. Blake closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing everything. This was only the beginning. With the power of the system, he was no longer at the mercy of fate. He would shape his own destiny. Sia's voice echoed softly in his mind, a quiet reassurance. Master, the path ahead may be challenging, but with your abilities, you are more than ready. Blake exhaled slowly, a smirk tugging at his lips. Then let's see where this path takes me. Because one thing was certain, the world had no idea what was coming. Chapter 3. Encounter with a stray devil. When Blake finally snapped out of his trance, the school bell rang, signaling the end of class. He blinked, his sharp blue eyes now carrying a faint, ethereal glow. The change in his aura was subtle yet undeniable, like a fire that had been carefully stoked to burn brighter. The classroom was abuzz with hushed whispers, and more than a few girls shot lingering glances in his direction. Blake sighed inwardly. Great. Just what I needed. More attention. Ignoring the stares, he grabbed his cloth-wrapped sword from beside his desk and made his way out. Most students weren't allowed to bring weapons to school, but thanks to his sister's influence, and Rias Grimori's special permission, he enjoyed a few privileges. As he walked through the corridors, the glances continued. Some were subtle, others, not so much. Did he always look that cool? One girl whispered. I thought he was handsome before, but now he's like a mysterious noble prince, another sighed dreamily. Mysterious noble prince. Seriously. Blake resisted the urge to roll his eyes. His aloof, distant demeanor wasn't just for show. It kept unnecessary trouble at bay. But deep down, he had to admit, it was amusing how easily people romanticized things. Putting those thoughts aside, he turned his focus inward. Sia, he asked mentally, if my family is so influential, why weren't they mentioned in the original story? Wouldn't Rias have tried to recruit me as a servant? That's because the Silva family didn't originally exist in this world, Master, Sia replied sweetly. Your presence altered reality, creating a background that seamlessly fits into this world's history. So I'm essentially an anomaly. Blake mused. An anomaly? With plot armor, Sia teased. Blake smirked. I can work with that. With only 2 months until the main events of the story unfolded, he had no time to waste. If he didn't grow strong enough, he'd end up as nothing more than background filler in a world crawling with devils, angels, and dragons. And there were certain characters, Rias, Akano, Kaneko, who deserved a much better protagonist than Issei Hyodo. As Blake was lost in thought, a sweet, familiar voice interrupted him. Blake-kun, are you adjusting well to school life here? Blake turned toward the voice, then promptly forgot how to breathe. What was the most breathtaking shade of red? The crimson of roses. The rich hue of rubies. The deep scarlet of a setting sun. No, none of the above. The most captivating red Blake had ever seen was her hair. Whoosh. A gentle breeze swept through the campus, brushing past the track field, rustling through trees, and teasing the long, flowing crimson strands of the girl standing before him. She was tall, poised, and radiated an effortless elegance. One hand delicately tucked a strand of windblown hair behind her ear, while the other rested lightly at her side. Her features were breathtaking, so flawless they seemed unreal. But even her beauty paled in comparison to the fiery cascade of red that framed her figure. Rias Grimori. The moment stretched on longer than it should have. Blake, are you all right? Rias asked, tilting her head slightly. Blake blinked, snapping out of his momentary daze. Ah, yes. Thank you for your concern, Rias-senpai. I'm fine. His cool demeanor returned almost instantly. Rias studied him for a second longer, as if trying to decipher something. Then, with a gentle smile, she said, "That's good to hear. It's almost time for club activities, so I'll leave you be." With that, she turned and walked away. Blake exhaled, shaking his head. Seeing her in person really is something else. He'd already known what she looked like from his memories, but experiencing her presence firsthand was different. Much different. Shrugging off the lingering effect of their encounter, he made his way toward the kendo club. Time passed quickly. After an intense kendo session, Blake wiped the sweat from his brow and finally left the campus. The night air was crisp, and the streets were mostly empty. As he walked through a narrow alley to take a shortcut home, his senses sharpened. Something felt off. ZZZT. ZZZT. A strange, static-like noise crackled in the air. Blake came to an abrupt halt. His gaze flickered toward the high walls of the alley, where a shadowy figure lurked. Whoosh. Without warning, a sharp whistling sound tore through the night. Blake's instinct screamed at him. He twisted to the side, just in time. Thwack. Black, needle-like projectiles embedded themselves into the ground where he had stood mere moments ago, piercing deep into the concrete. Blake narrowed his eyes. Well, that's definitely not normal. A low, inhuman growl echoed from the shadows. Then, stepping into the dim light, a creature emerged, its body twisted and grotesque, a sinister grin stretching across its face. Ah, a fresh human. And one with such strong life force, the creature sneered, licking its lips. You'll make a fine meal. Blake cracked his knuckles. I don't know what's uglier, your face or your personality. The stray devil let out a guttural snarl. Cocky little brat. I'll tear you apart. Blake sighed. Why do they always say that? It's like you guys have a villain handbook or something. The creature lunged, claws extended. Chapter 4. The terror of luck stealers. And then Blake moved. Kahahe. I didn't expect a mere human like you to dodge my attack. You're making me want to devour you even more. The voice was grating, like nails on a chalkboard, accompanied by an eerie skittering that sent an uncomfortable shiver down Blake's spine. Perched on the alley wall was a grotesque, 3-meter-tall spider, if you could still call it that. Its monstrous body looked like something straight out of a horror movie, complete with thick, bristling hairs and needle-like legs. But the worst part, the face attached to its front. Human, yet twisted. Eyes too large, mouth stretched too wide, thick strands of hair sprouting from its cheeks like some demented werewolf. Green, viscous saliva dripped from its lips, sizzling as it hit the pavement. Blake's expression deadpanned. Yeah. Nope. That's nightmare fuel. The system chimed in. Ding. Mission issued. Eliminate the lower class stray devil reward. 20 luck points. Blake exhaled. A monster encounter right after transmigrating. Just my luck. A pause. Then, realizing what he just said, he added, wait, actually, scratch that. It's literally my luck. I should have seen this coming. But there was no running away. If he couldn't handle a low-class stray devil, he had no business surviving in a world filled with gods, devils, and dragons. And besides, he had a new toy to test out. The spider demon chuckled darkly, its grotesque mouth twisting into something that might have been a grin. Oh, you're not running. How foolish. Blake unslung the sword bag from his back, undoing the straps with practiced ease. Are you stupid? He asked, casually drawing his blade. The sound of steel rang through the alley. This terrain works in my favor. He pulled Frost Whisper free from its sheath. The slender, midnight black blade gleamed under the dim streetlights, silver patterns dancing along its surface. The spider demon screeched and lunged, its 8 muscular legs propelling it forward with terrifying speed. Half a meter away, it raised one spiked front leg, aiming to skewer Blake on the spot. Crunch. Blake was already gone. He sidestepped effortlessly, watching as the demon's leg smashed into the ground, cracking the pavement. Too slow. With one smooth motion, he slashed downward at the creature's face. Splurt. A deep gash tore across its grotesque features. Green blood sprayed through the air. AAARRGGHHH. The spider howled. Its fury only made it sloppier. The demon lunged again, its disgusting mouth wide open, rows of jagged teeth glistening with toxic saliva. Blake tilted his head slightly. Yeah, no thanks. Thwack. Another sidestep. Another clean strike. This time, straight through its eye. The spider let out a guttural shriek, thrashing wildly. Then, suddenly, its hairs bristled. Blake's instincts screamed at him. Perceptual distortion. Activated. Time slowed. He saw it. Black, needle-like projectiles exploding outward like bullets, tearing through the alley walls and pavement. Had he reacted a second later, he would have been Swiss cheese. Instead, he landed gracefully a few meters away, perfectly unscathed. The demon. Still thrashing. Still bleeding. Still too dumb to realize it was completely outclassed. Dodging the frenzied spider's attacks was, well, almost too easy. Blake barely had to try. He weaved through its wild swings like he was taking a casual evening stroll, his blade slicing at the creature's joints and weak points. But, even with Frost Whisper's sharpness, he couldn't land a killing blow. His strikes either bounced off its tough exoskeleton or got snagged on bone. Blake clicked his tongue. TCH. Annoying. This confirms it, he muttered. While Frost Whisper is a good blade, it's still just a normal sword. If I had a high-class weapon, this thing would already be dead. The spider demon, now on its last nerve, screeched. Why won't you just die? Blake smirked. Funny, I was just about to ask you the same thing. Let's try luck plundering, shall we? See ya, Blake called mentally. Analyze its stats. Right away, Master. A translucent status screen popped up. Name, Andreu, Stray Devil level. Lower class devil age. 40 luck value. 15 base. 20 Blake rubbed his chin. 15 luck, huh, no wonder this thing's cannon fodder. Then, an idea struck him. See ya, he grinned. Initiate a basic luck plundering on Andreu. As you wish, Master. The moment the command was issued, Blake felt it. Something shifted. Like an invisible hand grasping the threads of fate and twisting them ever so slightly. Ding. Luck siphoning successful. Andreu's luck reduced by 25 points. Current luck value, 10. Master's total luck is now 25. Blake barely had time to process the update before the night sky darkened. Thunder rumbled. A massive bolt of blue lightning tore through the heavens. Boom. The strike hit dead center. The spider demon screamed as electricity ripped through its body, searing its flesh, frying its insides. When the light faded, all that remained was a charred, smoldering corpse. Blake exhaled, lowering his blade. His heart still pounded from the rush of combat. Sia's voice hummed in his mind. Master, you handled that quite well. Though I must say, that luck siphoning was a bit overkill. Blake snorted. Yeah, tell that to the spider roast over there. He glanced at the burnt husk of his former enemy, then back up at the sky. Okay, he admitted, cracking a grin. That was way cooler than I expected. Luck plundering wasn't just useful, it was terrifying. He could turn fate itself into a weapon. Blake sheathed Frost Whisper, stretching his shoulders. I still have a long way to go, he muttered. Then, smirking to himself, he added, but this is gonna be fun. Chapter 5. Rias's curiosity. The sudden crack of thunder sent a shockwave through the night, startling pedestrians on the nearby streets. Confused murmurs spread through the crowd like wildfire. Did you hear that? A thunderstorm. But the sky's completely clear. Maybe it was an explosion. Should we call the police? Blake, standing amidst the smoldering remains of the spider demon, exhaled slowly. His ice-blue eyes flicked toward the charred corpse, the air still tingling with residual electricity. After a beat, he chuckled dryly. So, that's what happens when your luck hits rock bottom. Clear skies, and it still gets struck by lightning. Absolutely tragic. Ding. Congratulations, Master. Quest complete. Reward, plus 20 luck points. Current total, 45 luck points. Blake glanced at the notification, feeling the subtle surge of luck settle within him. He made a mental note. Lesson learned, being unlucky in this world is downright fatal. Shaking his head, he sheathed Frost Whisper and turned to leave. But just as he stepped out of the alley, an amused voice chimed in his mind. If you hadn't stepped back, Master, you would have been caught in that blast. Blake smirked. I'll admit it. Good call, see ya. The voice carried a hint of pride. It's my duty to protect you, Master. Blake let out a small chuckle. You're starting to sound smug. I have no idea what you mean, Sia replied way too innocently. Rolling his eyes, Blake gave one last glance toward a dark corner of the alley before vanishing into the night. Unbeknownst to Blake, two pairs of eyes had been watching him from above. Perched atop a rooftop, a blonde-haired young man adjusted his stance, his Kuo Academy uniform barely rustling in the night breeze. He studied Blake's departing figure with a mix of curiosity and appraisal. President, his speed is impressive, he remarked, his tone even. Though, his attack power leaves much to be desired. Rias Grimoire stood beside him, her long, crimson locks cascading down her back like a river of fire. Arms crossed, she observed Blake with an intrigued expression. Indeed, Yuto. His speed might even surpass yours, she mused. But his offensive strength is lacking. That's to be expected, though. He's just an ordinary human skilled in swordsmanship. Nothing more. Yet her tone wavered at the last part, as if she didn't fully believe her own words. Yuto Kiba, the knight of her peerage, studied his master's expression. You seem regretful, President. Rias hesitated. It's just a shame. Despite his heritage, she trailed off, her gaze momentarily distant. Yuto didn't press further. If Rias wasn't ready to say more, there was no point prying. Instead, he simply nodded. Shall we go, then? Yes. With a flick of her wrist, a glowing red teleportation circle materialized beneath them. But before stepping through, Rias cast one last glance at the alleyway. Her curiosity about Blake Silva had only deepened. Back in his small rented apartment, Blake wasted no time. First, a quick shower to wash off the blood and grime. Second, a simple meal, stir-fried noodles, because he was too exhausted to make anything fancy. Third, collapsing onto his bed, still damn-fared, staring at the ceiling. The battle against Andreu had been a wake-up call. Sure, his speed was solid. His perceptual distortion had given him a clear edge. Against humanoid enemies of similar strength, he could probably win without much effort. But against beasts like Andreu, that was a different story. He clenched his fist. I was helpless against its natural defenses. If it weren't for my luck manipulation, that fight would have dragged out. And if it were a mid-class devil instead, he exhaled. Yeah, I'd be dead. In a world crawling with gods, devils, and supernatural monsters, mid-class threats were everywhere. If I want to survive, I can't just rely on dodging. I need power. Real power. And more importantly, Leah. His younger sister had sacrificed too much for him. He refused to be weak in a world where strength dictated survival. And then, there was the Silva family. Blake's jaw tightened. They'll get what's coming to them. Just as the air in the room started to feel dangerously heavy, a familiar, cheerful voice snapped him out of it. Master Tilda, if you want to grow stronger, I have a suggestion. Blake rubbed his temples. You always have a suggestion. Sia ignored his dry remark. Use the system's dimension hopping feature. Exploring alternate worlds increases your chances of triggering quests. Blake raised an eyebrow. The one that resets weekly. Meaning I either use it or lose it. Exactly. It would be such a waste to let it sit there. Blake considered it. It was true. Dimension hopping meant exposure to new enemies, new opportunities, and new rewards. But at the same time, I'm exhausted, he admitted. Diving into an unknown world while half asleep sounds like a great way to die. Sia huffed. A fair point, Master. Then we'll save it for tomorrow. Her tone softened. Rest well. Blake sighed but smiled slightly. Yeah, tomorrow. As exhaustion finally claimed him, only one thought remained clear in his mind. No matter what comes next, I'll carve my own path. And with that, he drifted into sleep, unaware of the curious red-haired devil who had set her sights on him. Chapter 6. First encounter with Irie Akazuki. Whoosh tilde. A breeze swept through as Blake's eyes fluttered open. The moment he took in his surroundings, the distant murmur of chatter and shuffling footsteps reached his ears. He blinked. Ahead, young men and women in uniforms walked past in pairs, chatting animatedly as they headed toward a massive school building. Some whispered, others openly stared at him, especially the girls, who practically sparkled with admiration. The guys, less impressed. Jealous glares. Scowls. Some clenched their fists like they were already picturing his face as a punching bag. Blake sighed internally. Here we go again. His silver hair, crystal blue eyes, and chiseled features tended to have that effect. He didn't do anything special, yet people either idolized him or resented him. And then, his gaze landed on the large engraved sign near the entrance. Street. Maple Academy. A pause. Blake squinted. Wait a second. Street. Maple Academy. Isn't that? A memory surfaced, making him frown slightly. He'd definitely heard of this place before. Wasn't this from that cultured anime he watched in his past life? He exhaled. Huh. Either reality is playing a joke on me, or I ended up in a world based on that. Not exactly the high-stakes battlefield I was hoping for. Before he could dwell on it, a familiar cheerful voice rang in his mind. Master, congratulations. You arrived exactly where you wanted. You're so lucky tilde. Sia chirped. Blake rubbed his temples. Right. Luck. Sure. If he had a choice, he'd prefer a world more suited for training. Somewhere with actual threats instead of, well, this. Still, he couldn't deny one thing. A new world meant new opportunities. And it seemed like one of those opportunities had just made itself known. Blake's senses tingled. His expression turned serious as he abruptly looked toward a spot about a kilometer away. A dense aura of malice. It was unmistakable. Something's happening over there. Without hesitation, he changed course, weaving through students before breaking into a light sprint toward the alley. At that same moment, deep inside the alley, a frustrated yet clearly annoyed voice echoed. I already told you, I don't want to go to the KTV. Why are you guys so persistent? The voice belonged to a girl. There was an edge of panic beneath her irritation, making it clear she wasn't just dealing with a pushy friend. 3 older students, 2 tall, 1 particularly burly, stood in front of her, their smirks oozing arrogance. The tallest sneered, crossing his arms. Watch your mouth, freshman. We're your seniors, show some respect. The burly one chuckled. Relax, Akazuki-san. We're just inviting you to sing, that's all. Despite his seemingly polite tone, his eyes betrayed his real intentions. The way he scanned her figure made her skin crawl. She knew exactly what kind of guys they were. Even if they weren't stupid enough to do anything out in the open, their goal was obvious. And unfortunately for them, they were about to have a very bad day. Is this really how low you've fallen? Forcing a girl into something she clearly doesn't want to do. A cold, sharp voice cut through the air like a blade. The 3 boys snapped their heads around, only to find a silver-haired stranger standing at the alley's entrance. His casual attire made him seem relaxed, but the long object strapped to his back hinted at something far more dangerous. The tallest snarled. The hell are you supposed to be? The burly one frowned, taking a step forward. Mind your own business, kid. Blake exhaled, already bored of their attitudes. Yeah, see, that's the problem. I can smell the malice coming off you two like cheap cologne. The tall one's eye twitched. You. Bang. Blake's fist smashed into his face before he could finish his sentence, sending him flying backward like a ragdoll. The burly one barely had time to react before Blake swept his leg out from under him, sending him crashing down hard onto the pavement. Thunk. A brief silence. Then, gah. The 2 seniors howled in pain, clutching their injuries. Their eyes were wide with shock and terror, because as far as they could tell, Blake hadn't even moved properly before they were on the ground. It was like he had teleported between attacks. And now, he was staring down at them, his voice flat and emotionless. Get lost. If I catch you pulling this crap again, I'll break your legs. A heavy silence fell over the alley. The two seniors scrambled to their feet, nodding frantically before practically tripping over themselves as they bolted out of sight. The moment they disappeared, a hushed murmur spread among the students who had been watching from a distance. Especially the girls. Their eyes sparkled as they stared at Blake's back, admiration written all over their faces. He wasn't just handsome. He was strong. Some had fantasized about meeting their Prince Charming, but never in their wildest dreams had they expected to witness something straight out of a movie. Naturally, their gazes drifted toward the one girl at the center of it all. Irie Akazuki. Her golden blonde twin ponytails shimmered under the sunlight, emerald green eyes wide with surprise. Her delicate features were already stunning, but with her slight blush from the situation, she looked straight out of a fairy tale. And yet, unlike the other girls, her expression wasn't admiration. It was pure curiosity. Blake turned back toward her, ignoring the onlookers. He met her gaze and smiled slightly, his previous cold demeanor softening. You all right? Irie blinked, still processing what just happened. Then, realizing he was waiting for an answer, she quickly straightened up, her usual confidence returning. I'm fine, she said, brushing off imaginary dust. Thanks to you. Blake nodded, satisfied. He hadn't expected much from this random world, but fate had a way of throwing him into interesting situations. And today, it had led him straight to Irie Akazuki. Chapter 7. The Wrath of Akazuki Kuzu. Irie Akazuki's emerald green eyes lingered on Blake, still processing everything that had just happened. She wasn't the type to get flustered easily, but this entire situation had caught her off guard. Not only had she been cornered in an alley, but a silver-haired stranger had swooped in and effortlessly saved the day like some kind of action movie protagonist. And now, he was just walking away. I'm fine, Irie stammered, snapping herself out of it. She waved a hand in front of her face, trying to appear unbothered. Blake nodded. Glad to hear it. Be careful next time. He turned on his heel, clearly ready to leave. Irie's eyes widened slightly. Wait, that's it. Most guys would have at least tried to milk the moment, maybe acted smug or hinted at getting something in return. But Blake, he looked like he couldn't care less. That was new. Hey, wait, she blurted out. I'm Irie Akazuki. Just call me Irie. What's your name? Blake paused, glancing over his shoulder. He smiled slightly, his crystal blue eyes gleaming with amusement. Irie, huh, got it. My name's Blake Silva. I'm a visitor from the USA. The playful tilt in his voice made her eyebrow twitch. USA. Irie folded her arms, studying him more carefully. A silver-haired, blue-eyed, drop-dead gorgeous foreigner, and he just happens to be casually strolling through my school's alleyways. Yeah, sure, totally normal. She wasn't buying it, but before she could question him further, Blake's entire demeanor shifted. His posture stiffened, and his gaze flickered toward the crowd. Irie noticed the change immediately. Silva-kun, what's wrong? Blake didn't answer. Instead, his expression darkened, and he murmured under his breath, he looks familiar. From within the gathering crowd, a pair of piercing eyes locked onto Blake with the intensity of a predator. Standing behind the students was a middle-aged man, dressed in an expensive-looking suit, his sharp features twisted into a mask of barely contained rage. Blake met his glare head-on, his own gaze turning ice-cold. Malice. Pure, seething malice. Not just the petty jealousy he'd felt earlier from random students. No, this was something worse. Someone wanted him dead. Sia, Blake murmured. Scanning tilde. In a blink, Sia's sweet voice chimed in his mind, delivering the results. Human. Kuzu Akazuki age. 42 luck value. 100 evaluation. A child of luck in a low-tier world. Blake's eyebrow twitched. Oh, it's him. Irie's stepfather. The one guy he'd already pegged as trouble. And just because Blake had exchanged a few words with Irie, this man was practically foaming at the mouth. Dude, chill. It's not that deep. Blake sighed, shifting his weight slightly as he glanced back at Irie. Sorry, he said, his tone casual. I just remembered I have something to take care of. Looks like fate's on our side, though, I have a feeling we'll meet again. He flashed her one last lazy grin. Then, in the blink of an eye, melted into the crowd. Irie stared after him, dumbfounded. Then her fingers twitched in frustration. Really? He saved her, flirted with her, vanished without a trace, and didn't even leave his number. Irie let out a huff, kicking a nearby rock. Seriously, what kind of guy does that? A deep scowl crossed Kuzu Akazuki's face as he pushed through the lingering students, his gaze locked onto Irie. He had seen everything. His stepdaughter, the girl he had painstakingly raised, had actually smiled at another man. Worse, she had looked at that silver-haired brat with genuine interest. That was unacceptable. Kuzu reached Irie's side, his voice dropping into a tense, forced calm. Why are you in this alley? Irie, still annoyed at Blake's mysterious disappearing act, barely spared him a glance. What's it to you? Kuzu's eye twitched. I'm your father. Ha! Irie scoffed, crossing her arms. Stepfather. The utter disdain in her voice hit like a slap. Kuzu's expression stiffened, his anger barely hidden beneath his carefully crafted mask of authority. She had never spoken to him like that before. And the reason was clear: Blake. That boy had already poisoned her mind. As Irie turned on her heel and walked away, Kuzu's hands curled into fists, his nails digging into his palms. His teeth clenched, his face darkening with pure possessiveness. You forced my hand, Irie. He slipped a hand into his pocket, fingertips brushing against a small vial, a liquid swirling ominously inside. No one else would have. Her. Not Blake. Not anyone. And as Kuzu turned, he didn't notice the silver-haired figure watching from a distance. Blake walked casually down the street, hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. See ya. Yes, Master Tilda. I need an identity here. Something official. Sia's voice perked up. Ooh, you mean, like, forged documents, history, and a legitimate student record. Exactly, Blake muttered. If I don't have a proper background, it'll be a pain in the ass to move around. Sia giggled. I can do that easily. Want me to make you a third-year transfer student at St. Maple Academy? Maybe. Put you in a class next to Irie's. Blake smirked. Make it happen. And while you're at it, set up my residence near the Akazuki estate. Sia whistled playfully. Stalking already, Master. Blake rolled his eyes. More like preventative measures. I don't trust that bastard stepdad of hers. Sia hummed approvingly. Ooh, Tilda protective much. Just do it. Alright Tilda, but fabricating a fully functional identity will cost 10 luck points. Blake barely hesitated. Fine. After all, you have to spend money to make money. Or, in this case, spend luck to change fate. Chapter 8. Saving Irie, Blake Silva, huh. Standing outside a newly assigned house next to the Akazuki residence, Blake Silva ran a hand over the wooden nameplate near the entrance. His gaze flickered with amusement. He hadn't expected the identity fabrication to go through so easily. Sia truly was an overpowered system. Before he could step inside to explore his new home, an intense wave of malice washed over him. Dark energy, thick, suffocating, and sickening, spilled from the direction of the Akazuki house, accompanied by a faint, desperate cry. Blake's expression darkened. Change of plans, he muttered, pivoting on his heel. He moved without hesitation, heading straight for the source of the disturbance. Inside the Akazuki household, Irie staggered backward, gripping the edge of a dresser for support. A burning sensation coursed through her veins, making her skin feel unbearably hot. Her breath came in sharp, uneven gasps. She wasn't naive. She had always known that Kuzu Akazuki was a vile man. But drugging her, that was a level of depravity she hadn't accounted for. You only have yourself to blame, Irie, Kuzu purred, his voice dripping with false regret. He leaned against the doorway, the spray bottle still in his grip. If you hadn't taken an interest in that silver-haired brat, I wouldn't have had to act so soon. Irie clenched her teeth, willing herself to fight the effects of the drug. But her vision blurred, and a traitorous part of her mind whispered that her body was no longer hers to control. No. Not like this. Her hand instinctively reached for her clothes, trembling. Desperation clawed at her throat. Somebody, please, help. And as if answering her silent prayer, bang. The door exploded inward. Ah. Kuzu barely had time to react before it slammed into his face, sending him crashing backward. Blake stepped inside, his piercing blue eyes scanning the room. He took in Irie's flushed, struggling form and the disgusting excuse of a man on the floor, and in that instant, his decision was made. He hated scum like this. Kuzu groaned, clutching his nose as he staggered to his feet. Who the hell do you think? Crack. Blake didn't let him finish. He grabbed Kuzu by the collar, effortlessly lifting him off the ground. Then, with a single fluid motion, he slammed the man's head into the nearest wall. A sickening crunch echoed through the room. Kuzu's body went limp. Blood trickled down from his forehead as he crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Blake let out a breath, shaking off his hand as if ridding himself of filth. Trash. Turning to Irie, his expression softened. She was still dazed, her breathing uneven, eyes glazed over. Give me, she murmured, barely conscious. Her fingers weakly grasped at the hem of her shirt, her body betraying her mind. Blake's brows twitched. Yeah, not happening. Sighing, he scooped her up into his arms and carried her into a separate room. This wasn't ideal, but leaving her like this was out of the question. For the next hour, Irie struggled against the effects of the drug, making incomprehensible sounds that would have been wildly misinterpreted by anyone outside the room. Blake, maintaining what little dignity he had left, did his best to help her through it. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, her breathing evened out. The feverish heat subsided. Blake leaned against the wall, exhausted. Well, that was an experience. Irie, curled up in the blankets, slowly blinked herself awake. Her emerald eyes flickered with confusion, then realization. And then, horror. You. Her voice was hoarse. Quote. What did you do? Blake raised a brow. Saved your life. You're welcome. Irie's gaze darted around the room. She spotted the crumpled sheets, the sweat-soaked fabric of her clothes, and, oh. Her face turned red. You. Blake held up his hands. Before you yell, I did nothing inappropriate. You had a drug in your system, and I helped you sweat it out. Irie narrowed her eyes, clearly suspicious. But as she replayed what little she remembered, she reluctantly realized he was telling the truth. Fine, she huffed, crossing her arms. I guess I'll let you off the hook. You're so generous, Blake deadpanned. Despite her annoyance, Irie couldn't help but smile. The man had just saved her from something far worse. And for that, she was grateful. Then something clicked in her mind. Wait, why were you even near my house in the first place? Blake leaned back, stretching his arms. I just moved in next door. Irie blinked. You're my new neighbor. Yep. A slow smirk spread across her lips. Well, looks like fate really wants us to keep meeting, huh? Before Blake could respond, she suddenly latched onto his arm, pressing herself against him. Blake stiffened. Quote. Are you always this forward? HMPH. You already took responsibility, so I might as well make myself comfortable, she teased. Blake sighed. This girl is going to be trouble, isn't she? Few moments later outside, the distant sound of footsteps approached. Irie's body tensed. Oh no. What? Blake glanced toward the door. My sister is back. Blake didn't hesitate. I'm out. Before Irie could react, he had already grabbed his coat and walked straight out the front door. Irie gawked. Why didn't he hide? At the entrance, a beautiful young woman with dark brown hair and striking violet eyes stood with a perplexed expression. Marina Akazuki, Irie's older sister, had just stepped onto the porch, clutching her school bag. As she approached, she saw a silver-haired man casually strolling past her as if he owned the place. Their eyes met. Blake gave her a polite nod. Good evening. Marina blinked in confusion. Quote. Good evening. Before she could question him further, he was gone. Marina frowned. Who the hell was that? Pushing the thought aside, she entered the house. Irie, I'm home. She froze. The smell. The messy sheets. The undeniable evidence of what had just transpired. And Irie, lying there, looking utterly disheveled. Silence. Then, ah. Irie groaned and covered her face with a pillow. It's not what you think. Meanwhile, Blake, already halfway down the street, smirked as a notification from Sia popped up. Ding. Congratulations, Master, for completing the hidden task. Save Irie. Reward, 20 luck points. Current luck, 55. Not bad. Then, another thought struck him. Sia, let's use my luck-stealing ability on Kuzu Akazuki. A beat of silence. Then, ding. Luck stealing. Successful. 30 luck points stolen from Kuzu Akazuki. Master's current luck, 85. Blake chuckled. That bastard still has 70 left. I'll take my time bleeding him dry. With that, he strolled toward his new home, humming to himself. Tomorrow was going to be interesting. Chapter 9. Awkward sisters. Quick, quick, I need to call the police. I need to call the police. Marina Akazuki's hands trembled as she fumbled with her phone, ready to dial. A home invasion, assault, and, even worse, her sister being violated by their own father. This was beyond outrageous. It was the kind of horror story you saw on crime documentaries, not something that actually happened in real life. Sis, no, you're mistaken. Irie Akazuki, still sprawled out on the bed, flailed her arms weakly in protest. Mistaken. Marina froze midial, blinking in confusion. Sis, come here. Let me explain. Irie sighed, rubbing her temples. She motioned for Marina to come closer, feeling exhausted in more ways than one. Despite this being her first time, it wasn't technically her first time, considering she had been with Blake Silva several times now. Either way, her legs felt like jelly. With a deep breath, she carefully recounted everything that had happened. So, you're telling me that Dad, she practically gagged at the word, sprayed you with some kind of aphrodisiac and tried to assault you. And just when things were about to get worse, your boyfriend showed up, beat him senseless, and saved you. Marina stared at her sister as if she had just read the most ridiculous soap opera script of all time. Pretty much, Irie confirmed, sighing. Marina was silent for a moment, processing the absurdity of it all. I told you Kuzu Akazuki was a scumbag, Irie huffed, scowling. But you didn't believe me. Stay away from him. If he did this to me, what makes you think he won't try it with you next time? I understand, Marina mumbled, suddenly feeling like an idiot. She had ignored Irie's warnings before, assuming she was just exaggerating. But now, faced with the grim reality, guilt gnawed at her insides. Good, Irie nodded firmly. With Marina's help, Irie hobbled to the bathroom for a much-needed shower. They ended up having an awkward but oddly sweet sisterly moment, with Marina shyly asking about certain adult matters while Irie, despite her exhaustion, tried her best to answer without dying of embarrassment. By the time they returned, changed into comfortable nightwear, the ambulance had arrived to haul away Kuzu Akazuki, who was still bleeding from the head and blissfully unconscious. Meanwhile, phew, finally finished cleaning. Blake Silva collapsed onto his new living room couch, looking like he had just run a marathon. This place was a mess, he groaned. He had been expecting a move-in ready house, but instead, it looked like the previous tenants had abandoned it weeks ago. Dust was everywhere, and the air had that musty, noonslivhirinages smell. So, naturally, he had spent the past few hours doing some heavy-duty cleaning. Master, this is a result of altering the world, Sia explained sweetly in his head. Blake sighed. Right. Because in the original timeline, people were still living here, but now, thanks to my request, they conveniently moved out a couple of weeks ago. Exactly. Sia chirped. Ding dong. The doorbell rang. Blake, sensing a familiar presence with his spiritual awareness, smirked. As he opened the door, Irie stood there with her hands on her hips, looking much livelier than before. Hello, Blake. I came to see you. You should be thanking me, you know. She teased. Blake raised an eyebrow. Oh, and why's that? Because I went through a lot today, and yet, here I am, gracing you with my presence. Uzu. He chuckled. Beside her, Marina shifted nervously before. Bowing politely. Silva-san, hello. Thank you for saving my sister. I'm Marina Akazuki, Irie's older sister. Nice to meet you, Marina. Irie, Marina, come in. I was just about to make some tea, Blake said casually, stepping aside. Marina's face turned red at hearing her first name used so casually. In Japan, that was considered pretty forward, especially from someone you just met. She opened her mouth to say something, but Blake had already turned and walked inside. Seeing her sister's flustered expression, Irie smirked. Don't overthink it, sis. Blake's American. In America, calling someone by their first name is totally normal. Marina hesitated but then nodded, her expression softening. However, she was still a little surprised at how fluent Blake's Japanese was despite being from the US. Blake made them tea, and soon, the three of them were chatting comfortably. With his extensive knowledge from 2 lifetimes, Blake had a way of making people laugh, and he effortlessly bridged the gap between himself and Marina. Even the initial awkwardness faded, and Marina found herself actually enjoying his company. However, when she learned that Irie and Blake had only known each other for a day, she nearly spit out her tea. Wait, hold on, she coughed. You two met yesterday, and you're already dating. Yep, Irie said proudly. And you've already. Marina trailed off, looking between them. Irie turned red but nodded. Marina's brain short-circuited for a second. One day. Who does that? She wanted to lecture her sister, but Irie looked happy. And Blake, despite the crazy circumstances, actually seemed reliable. Still, Marina couldn't shake off a nagging thought. Deep down, she felt a tiny pang of envy. Not that she'd ever admit it. After all, she had a boyfriend, Unozan. Even so. Blake was undeniably better than Unozan in every possible way. Marina shook her head. Nope, not going there. Anyway, we should get going, Marina announced, clearing her throat. Our door is still broken, and it needs fixing. Blake scratched the back of his head. Ah, right, that was my fault. Tell you what, let me fix it for you. It's the least I can do. Marina blinked. She had planned to use that as an excuse to leave, but now she couldn't exactly refuse his offer. All right, if you insist, she said, sighing. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Kuzu Akazuki groggily regained consciousness. His head was wrapped in thick bandages, and his entire body ached. I failed. I lost her, he muttered bitterly. His eyes burned with rage as he remembered Blake carrying Irie away. But then, a sinister smirk formed on his lips. If I can't have Irie, I'll take Marina instead. Ignoring the nurse's warnings, Kuzu angrily stormed out of the hospital, his mind filled with twisted plans. And then, thunk. Ah! Kuzu tripped over a loose stone on the pavement, face planting into the concrete with a loud crack. Pain shot through his body as something very sensitive took the full impact. Nearby, people gasped, but when they saw the absurdity of what had happened, they couldn't hold back their laughter. Did he just? He totally did. A kind passerby helped call for a nurse while chuckling under their breath. And just like that, Kuzu was wheeled back into the hospital. Only this time, for a completely different injury. Back at Irie and Marina's house, Blake finished fixing the door, feeling oddly satisfied. Little did he know, Kuzu's ridiculous streak of bad luck was far from over. And his own fate was already entangled with what was to come. Chapter 10. Masato Uno Maple Academy, Class 3A. The classroom was buzzing with morning chatter when the teacher cleared his throat and stepped forward. All right, everyone, settle down. We have a new transfer student joining us today. The door creaked open, and a tall, silver-haired young man stepped in. His piercing blue eyes swept across the room, carrying an effortless air of confidence. His features were striking, his presence commanding, and before he even spoke, half the class had already decided how they felt about him. The girls. Smitten. The guys. Not so much. Hello, everyone. I'm Blake Silva, a transfer student from America. Looking forward to studying with you all. As soon as he finished speaking, the room erupted. He's so handsome. Oh my god, is he a model? Damn it, another pretty boy. The boys clenched their fists, their jaws tightening as their girlfriends openly ogled the new arrival. Some had already accepted their fate, while others held on to the delusional hope that this foreigner wouldn't be a threat. A certain someone, however, was beyond livid. At one of the desks, Masato Uno sat frozen, his eye twitching as he watched Marina Akazuki, his girlfriend, stare at Blake with what could only be described as thinly veiled admiration. His hands curled into fists. So this is why you always refuse to let me hold your hand, Marina. Turns out you were saving yourself for some foreign pretty boy. Unforgivable. Meanwhile, the teacher, ignoring the chaos, gestured toward the back of the class. Silva-kun, you can take a seat there. Got it. As Blake walked past Marina, he flashed her a casual smile. A friendly smile. Marina, to her credit, managed to keep her composure, aside from the slight blush that betrayed her. Masato, however, saw everything. His fingers dug into his desk. This bastard. Blake, who was very much aware of the burning hostility radiating from one of his new classmates, casually sat down. "Sia, scan that guy for me," he murmured under his breath. A soft chime echoed in his mind, and a small translucent display appeared in his vision. Name: Masato Uno. Age: 18. Luck value: 38. Assessment: minor character with decent luck. Successfully confessed to Marina Akazuki due to her gentle nature. Blake raised an eyebrow. Luck value: 38. Not bad. He smirked. Still, dude's got no poker face. He's glaring at me like I stole his life savings. Shaking his head, Blake leaned back and closed his eyes, deciding that Masato Uno wasn't worth a second thought. As soon as the lunch bell rang, Blake was immediately swarmed. Blake-a-kun, what's your favorite food? Do you have a girlfriend? Boxers or briefs? Blake blinked, momentarily caught off guard by the sheer enthusiasm of his female classmates. He had expected some attention, but this was something else. Meanwhile, the boys sat in the corner like a support group, mourning the loss of their classroom's female population. Masato, on the other hand, was seething. Then, salvation arrived. Silva-san, can I talk to you for a second? A soft, hesitant voice cut through the chatter. The girls turned to see Marina standing at the edge of the group, looking slightly nervous. Sorry, ladies, Blake said with a charming smile. Looks like Marina wants to talk to me. There were some disappointed sighs, but they reluctantly backed off. Masato, watching from afar, nearly snapped his chopsticks in half. He called her by her first name. That was it. His blood pressure officially hit the danger zone. Meanwhile, Blake and Marina stepped into the hallway for a private conversation. Meanwhile, Masato's internal monologue was in shambles first name basis. When did that happen? Marina, my sweet, pure Marina, have you already been stolen from me? Masato sat at his desk, fists clenched, pupils shaking. His world was crumbling before his very eyes. The other guys, seeing his suffering, patted his back in silent condolence. One of them shook his head. Rest in peace, brother. Outside the classroom, Marina looked up at Blake, her cheeks a little pink. I didn't expect you to be the transfer student the teacher mentioned, and you're even in my class. Really? I thought I mentioned it yesterday. You didn't. She huffed, crossing her arms. Blake blinked. Huh, my bad. Guess it slipped my mind. Marina gave him a playful glare before sighing. Still, it's kind of nice. Blake smirked. Feels like fate, huh? Marina hesitated for a second before mumbling, maybe. Just as they were enjoying their moment, the door to the classroom creaked open. Masato Uno stood there, his expression a perfect blend of I'm totally fine and I want to throw myself off a cliff. Blake, seeing the sheer amount of bottled up frustration on the guy's face, struggled to keep a straight face. This guy, he's really about to explode, huh? When the final bell rang, Marina approached Blake with an apologetic look. Silva-san, I was going to show you around the school today, but I have a club meeting. No worries, Blake said smoothly. I need to pick up Irie anyway. Don't be late. Marina nodded and walked off, while Blake casually slung his bag over his shoulder, ready to leave. Masato, however, was frozen in his seat, staring at the doorway where Marina had just left. First name basis. Private hallway chat. Walking home together. It's over. I've lost her. Somewhere in the depths of his soul, Masato could feel the imaginary villain theme music playing in the background. Blake, meanwhile, yawned, stretched, and left the classroom, completely oblivious to the existential crisis he had just caused. Or maybe, he wasn't oblivious at all. With a smirk, he glanced over his shoulder at Masato, who was still sitting there, looking like a man who had just lost everything. Man, Blake muttered to himself. This school is way more entertaining than I thought. Chapter 11. Stay away from Marina Street Maple Academy. After class, Marina chuckled softly as she walked out of the classroom, her two friends flanking her. She had meant to greet her boyfriend, Masato Uno, on the way out. But the moment she turned to him, she stopped. Masato was staring at her. Not with warmth. Not with affection. With something cold. Unsettling. Marina hesitated, instinctively shrinking back. There was something off about his expression. Possessive, unreadable. And so, without a word, she left. Phew. Time to head out. After Marina left, Blake stood, stretching slightly, and casually walked out of the classroom. Follow him. From the back of the room, Masato glared at Blake's retreating figure. Turning to his two companions, he commanded them in a low voice before trailing after Blake himself. Masato was seething. He had pieced together the closeness between Marina and Blake and was furious, though he wasn't ready to confront Marina directly yet. Losing the school beauty as his girlfriend was not an option. His plan: scare Blake enough to keep him away. Come out. Stop hiding. Blake deliberately led the trio to an isolated corner of the school. Turning abruptly, he leaned against the wall, fixing a cold gaze on the three hiding in the shadows. Blake Silva, just because you're some transfer student doesn't mean you can act all high and mighty. Stay away from Marina, or I'll put you in the hospital. Masato stepped forward, his face dark with anger. Gesturing to his two lackeys, he barked orders to surround Blake, blocking any chance of escape. If you're that eager for a fight, I won't hold back. Surrounded by three, Blake's eyes glinted with sharp confidence, a faint smirk curling his lips. Get him. Enraged by Blake's arrogance, Masato lunged forward, throwing a fist aimed directly at Blake's face. Too slow and too weak. Crack. Before Masato could react, Blake caught his punch effortlessly, twisting his wrist. A loud snap echoed in the alley. Ah, it hurts. Masato cried out, his face twisting in agony from the sharp pain shooting up his arm. Let him go. The other two lackeys rushed forward, fists and feet flying. But Blake, ever composed, merely tightened his grip on Masato. With a swift pivot, he used the writhing Masato as a shield, letting the two lackeys' attacks land squarely on their friend. Ah! Blake watched as Masato let out a blood-curdling scream. One of the lackeys had landed a solid kick right where it hurt most, Masato's groin. Masato. Two didn't mean to. The guilty lackey froze, staring at his foot and the growing bloodstain on Masato's trousers. Panicked, he stammered an apology. The ominous crack he'd heard during the impact only deepened his dread. Had he just permanently ruined Masato's future? Apologizing in a fight? That's a first. Blake's calm voice broke through their panic. He didn't plan to let this drag out any longer. Thud. Blake's swift kick sent the apologetic lackey sprawling to the ground. Picking up the barely conscious Masato, he hurled him at the remaining lackey. Both collapsed in a heap. Take him to the hospital, Blake said, his tone as indifferent as ever. If you're lucky, he might still be salvageable. Though I wouldn't hold much hope for his descendants. Oh, and one more thing. Pausing, Blake glanced down at the trembling pair. Tell him to know his limits before picking a fight. With that, he turned on his heel, walking away like nothing had happened. This is bad. Really bad. The two lackeys looked at each other, then at the groaning Masato. They scrambled to their feet, carrying him toward the school gates as fast as they could. Other students stared, whispering and snickering at the sight of Masato's bloodstained pants. Blake had barely stepped past the school gates when a cheerful voice called out to him. Blake, did you come to pick me up? Irie Akazuki approached, her steps light, her smile as bright as ever. Without hesitation, she slipped her arm around his. Blake glanced at her, his expression relaxing slightly. Something like that, he said with a small smirk. Transferred to St. Maple this afternoon. Irie's eyes lit up. That explains why you were here yesterday. She tilted her head, a teasing pout forming. But you were totally going to go home alone today, weren't you? Blake chuckled. Maybe. You're so neglectful. She huffed, though the glint in her eyes betrayed her amusement. Blake exhaled, shaking his head. I'll make it up to you. Knowing you, that probably means something ridiculous, she mused. He smirked but said nothing. Irie, satisfied, held onto his arm a little tighter as they walked. Around them, students stared. Whispers spread through the crowd. Some watched with envy, others with disbelief. But Blake ignored them all. And as the two walked off, leaving the school behind, Masato Uno was carried toward the hospital, his fate uncertain. Chapter 12. The Madness of the Heart. 2 days later, Masato Uno lay in a hospital bed, his body bruised, his pride shattered. The official story. An accident. The truth. A humiliating defeat at the hands of Blake Silva. His so-called friends, too terrified of retaliation, refused to tell anyone what had really happened. They only whispered behind closed doors, spreading rumors that fed Masato's growing rage. Meanwhile, life moved on. Blake spent his days in quiet routine, training in the mornings, helping Marina with her studies in the afternoons, and losing himself in Irie's warm embrace in the evenings. But time had a way of stirring restless hearts. And Masato Uno's heart was drowning in madness. The school bell rang, marking the end of another day. Blake leaned back in his chair, stretching slightly before standing up. Another day had passed. Another evening with Irie awaited. But before he could leave, Marina checked her phone, her expression shifting. Silva-san, I've got something to take care of. I'll head out first. She offered him an apologetic smile before hurrying out of the classroom. Blake frowned. There was something off about the way she moved. Hurried, anxious. After a brief pause, he slipped his phone from his pocket and sent a message to Irie. Then, without a word, he followed. In a secluded alley behind the school, a figure stood waiting. Masato Uno. His once proud posture was gone, replaced by a sickly, frail frame. His skin was pale, his eyes sunken. But the fire inside him burned hotter than ever. His fingers trembled slightly as he shut his phone. A chilling grin spread across his lips. She finally showed up. Moments later, Marina hesitantly stepped into the alley. The second she saw him, she froze. Uno-san. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Masato took an unsteady step forward, his face contorting into something ugly. You took care of Silva while I was gone, huh? Bet that felt pretty damn good. His tone was mocking, but there was something else beneath it, something broken. Marina instinctively stepped back. You're mistaken, she said carefully. Silva-san and I are just friends. Masato's expression twisted further. Just friends. His voice rose, sharp with bitterness. Then why are you always with him? Why spend every damn break by his side? You wouldn't even let me touch you, but him. His breath hitched, his fists clenching. I was lying in a hospital bed, and you were running around with that pretty boy. Do you think I'm blind? Do you think I don't see it? His voice cracked. Marina swallowed, her heart pounding. It's not what you think, she tried again. He's been helping me study for the college entrance exams. Masato let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Study. With him. His eyes darkened. Don't make me laugh. Something shifted in his stance. Something dangerous. You think I don't know what's really going on? You've been lying to me this whole time. His hand slid into his pocket. And when it emerged, a glint of steel. A small fruit knife. Marina's breath caught in her throat. What? What are you doing? Masato took another step forward, backing her against the cold brick wall. What do you think? His smile widened, his grip tightening on the knife. I'll give you 3 seconds. Take off your clothes, or I'll start carving you up. The world seemed to slow. Marina's pulse pounded in her ears. The alley was empty. There was nowhere to run. No one to call for help. She was trapped. And Masato knew it. He took another step forward, savoring her fear. Then, you never learn, do you? A calm voice shattered the moment. Masato's body stiffened. Marina's wide eyes darted to the source. Blake Silva stood at the alley's entrance, his silver hair catching the fading light, his sharp blue eyes colder than ice. Masato turned his head stiffly, his expression contorting. His face paled. His pupils dilated. It was the same look a predator gave when it suddenly realized it was not the apex hunter. Don't come any closer. Masato's voice cracked, his grip on the knife tightening. I swear, if you do, I'll kill her. Blake didn't stop walking. Each step echoed against the pavement, steady and controlled. Masato swallowed hard. The last time he faced this man, he had barely been able to breathe through the pain. And yet, he was still trying to fight. Still clinging to the last scraps of his pride. Masato forced himself to smirk, his fingers pressing against Marina's shoulder, keeping her in place. She matters to you, doesn't she? His voice wavered, but the arrogance remained. Her life is in my hands. What are you gonna do, Silva? Beg. Get on your knees and plead. Maybe if you do, I'll let her go. Blake finally stopped walking. For a moment, there was silence. Then, you think I'm afraid of you? His voice was quiet. Steady. Masato flinched. I'm not afraid. I'm angry. Blake's gaze dropped to the knife in Masato's shaking hand. A man who resorts to threatening a woman, his tone was laced with ice. Let alone one who was supposed to be his girlfriend, his fingers twitched at his side. Isn't even worth my time. Masato opened his mouth, but before he could react, crack. The world blurred. Pain exploded in his wrist as Blake moved like a shadow, twisting his arm and ripping the knife away. A split second later, Masato flew. Blake's grip shifted, and with one powerful motion, he hurled him over his shoulder. Thud. Masato hit the pavement hard. A ragged scream tore from his throat as agony lanced through his body, his wrist, his ribs, his already injured spine. For a moment, he lay there, gasping. Then, nothing. No more words. No more fight. Just a broken boy, curled on the ground, too weak to move. Chapter 13. Unozan, our relationship ends here. Blake stood over Masato, his expression as cold as ice. He didn't move, sparing Marina from witnessing any further violence. Stay back. Masato whimpered, his body trembling as he dragged himself away, ignoring the searing pain coursing through him. See ya. Plunder his luck. The cooldown should be over by now. Blake's gaze remained locked on him, his voice devoid of emotion. There was no way he'd let him walk away unscathed. Understood. Beginning the process. Ding. Plunder successful. 40 luck points absorbed. Current luck. 125. Masato's luck plummeted to 2. A faint red glow flickered around him, like a warning of his impending misfortune. Blake watched him with complete indifference. A guy like you isn't worth sparing. He let out a breath, satisfied. If I hadn't drained him completely, I might have had to get my hands dirty again. That would have been annoying. Masato, still crawling away, didn't realize how much worse his life was about to get. Blake turned his attention to Marina, who stood trembling, her face pale with shock. With a gentler expression, he rested a hand on her shoulder. You okay? I'm fine. Silva-san, thank you for saving me. Her voice was shaky, but she managed a small nod. The warmth in Blake's eyes made her chest tighten, and for the first time since the ordeal began, she felt safe. If he hadn't shown up when he did, she didn't want to think about it. When I saw you suddenly take off running, I knew something was wrong. Good thing I followed, or who knows what would have happened. Blake sighed, shaking his head. Yeah. Marina swallowed hard and nodded. Then, despite her trembling legs, she took a step forward, then another. Masato was just about to stagger out of the alley when her voice rang out. Uno-san, we're done. Her tone was firm, her resolve unwavering. Masato froze mid-step. He didn't turn around, but his body stiffened. His fingers curled into fists, nails digging into his palms. For a moment, silence hung in the air. Then, without a word, he forced himself up, wincing at the pain in his lower body, and bolted. He didn't dare look back. Not when Blake was still standing there. Blake exhaled slowly, turning back to Marina. She had done it. But as she stood there, her head lowered, her body shaking, the weight of it all came crashing down. Her shoulders slumped, her breath hitched, and tears welled up in her eyes. Blake stepped forward and placed a comforting hand on her back. It's over now. And with those words, those simple, reassuring words, Marina's composure shattered. Wah! She threw herself against him, burying her face in his chest, sobbing uncontrollably. Blake held her close, one hand gently rubbing her back, the other resting on her head. He let her cry, let her release everything she'd been holding in. It took more than 10 minutes before her sobs quieted. By then, she was completely drained. Blake didn't hesitate. He scooped her up effortlessly, carrying her in his arms. As he walked through the quiet streets, Marina rested her head against his shoulder. Her fingers clutched at his shirt, her breathing soft and steady. Before long, she had fallen asleep. When Blake reached the Akazuki household, the door swung open before he even knocked. Irie Akazuki, Marina's younger sister, stood there, eyes widening at the sight of him carrying her sister. Blake. You and my sister. Shish. Blake quickly motioned for her to lower her voice. The last thing Marina needed was to be woken up. Irie narrowed her eyes but obeyed, stepping aside so he could enter. Once inside, Blake carried Marina to her room, laying her down gently on the bed. He tucked her in, making sure she was comfortable before stepping back. But the moment he turned around, Irie grabbed his arm and dragged him to the living room. She didn't stop until he was seated on the couch. Then, to his complete surprise, she straddled his lap, her arms crossed over her chest as she glared at him. All right, spill it. What happened? Her voice was sharp, her tone demanding. And don't even think about lying, or I'll make sure some of your Requests go unanswered tonight. Blake blinked. Then swallowed. Irie was close, too close. Her breath brushed against his cheek, her body pressing against his. His heartbeat kicked up a notch. Damn it. What kind of guy wouldn't react in a situation like this? He was only human. Irie's eyes flicked downward for a split second, then back up. Her smirk was dangerous. You better start talking, she murmured, leaning in ever so slightly. Blake rolled his eyes. All right, I'll tell you everything. He sighed, forcing himself to focus. Now was not the time to get distracted. Chapter 14. The Fall of Masato Uno, HMPH. I knew that guy was bad news. But would my sister listen? No. If you hadn't chased after her, she could have been in serious danger. Irie huffed, arms crossed, pacing back and forth in front of Blake. The frustration in her voice was unmistakable, but beneath it was a layer of deep concern. She had never liked Masato. From the moment Marina had accepted his confession, Irie had been wary. It wasn't love. Marina had barely even spoken to him before that. But her soft-hearted nature made it impossible for her to refuse. She had agreed out of politeness, too scared of hurting his feelings. And now, just as Irie had feared, it had ended in disaster. Now that she's broken up with him, there's no point dwelling on it, Blake said, his voice calm. The important thing is making sure Marina doesn't spiral. She's probably blaming herself. Irie paused, exhaling sharply. You're right. With a deep sigh, she ran a hand through her hair, letting go of her lingering frustration. Then, her expression shifted, her usual fiery spark returning. A slow, mischievous smile spread across her lips. So, how should I reward you? She leaned in slightly, her eyes flicking downward. She could feel the heat radiating from Blake's body, and her smirk deepened. Blake's blue eyes gleamed with amusement. He leaned closer, whispering something into her ear. Irie's face immediately turned crimson. HMPH. Men are all the same. She huffed, turning her head away in fake defiance. But the teasing glint in her eyes betrayed her act. Then, in a quieter voice, she added, but, since you saved my sister today, I'll allow it. Blake chuckled, pulling her into his arms. Having Irie as his girlfriend was the greatest blessing of all. Meanwhile, in Marina's room, the faint sound of voices carried through the house. Still groggy from sleep, she stirred, her violet eyes fluttering open. She followed the noise, rubbing her eyes as she wandered toward the living room. And then, her breath hitched. Her hands flew to her mouth as she took in the sight before her, eyes widening. Face burning, she immediately spun around and bolted back to her room, diving under the covers. Her heart pounded. Why am I jealous of my own sister? She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to push the thought away. But sleep didn't come easily that night. Elsewhere, Masato Uno stumbled through the streets, his steps uneven, his head hung low. His mind churned with thoughts of revenge, dark and twisted. Passers-by glanced at him warily, some stepping aside to avoid crossing his path. His expression was wild, his body reeking of desperation and hatred. He clenched his fists. Blake Silva, the name burned in his brain like a curse. Just then, a blaring horn cut through the night. Move. A truck barreled toward him, its headlights glaring like twin suns. Masato's head snapped up. His eyes widened in panic. For a split second, time seemed to slow. The world blurred at the edges. Then, bang. The impact sent him flying. His body twisted through the air before slamming onto the cold pavement. Blood pooled beneath him, staining the cracked asphalt. His vision blurred, the streetlights above flickering like dying stars. Why did this happen? Pain unlike anything he had ever known surged through his body. Agony. Regret. A cruel cocktail of emotions as his consciousness faded. His lips parted, as if to curse the world one final time, but the words never came. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had called for an ambulance. But it was too late. By the time they reached him, Masato Uno was gone. Meanwhile, oblivious to the chaos unfolding elsewhere, Blake stretched his arms, finally feeling satisfied. Irie lay beside him, her body limp with exhaustion. She barely mustered the energy to glare at him. You're such a beast, she mumbled, her voice hoarse. Blake smirked. Can't help it. You started it. Irie groaned, dragging herself toward the bathroom. Every muscle in her body ached, and she swore that next time, she'd make him suffer a little instead. After soaking in the tub for a while, she finally felt some relief. Her body relaxed, her mind drifting. Then, the bathroom door creaked open. Irie turned her head, and her eyes widened in shock. Standing there, wrapped in only a pink towel, was Marina. Her cheeks were flushed, her violet eyes downcast. Irie. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Irie blinked. And then realization hit. This night wasn't over yet. Chapter 15. Sisterly heart to heart. Irie sank deeper into the warm bathwater, letting out a contented sigh as the steam curled around her. Just as she was about to close her eyes, the bathroom door creaked open. Marina stepped inside, her violet eyes downcast, cheeks slightly flushed. A soft pink towel wrapped snugly around her body, clinging to her delicate frame. Irie blinked in surprise. Sis, your face is so red. Are you feeling okay? Irie asked, tilting her head, concern laced in her voice. Marina hesitated before shaking her head. No, I'm fine, but Irie, your face is even redder, she countered, her lips pressing into a small smile. This. Irie immediately sank lower into the water, her blush deepening. She knew exactly why her face was burning. 3 hours of rather loud activity with Blake had left her both exhausted and thoroughly embarrassed. Realizing that Marina had probably heard everything, Irie avoided her gaze, suddenly feeling awkward. Marina, on the other hand, let out a quiet sigh as she sat at the edge of the tub, absent-mindedly trailing her fingers through the water. Irie studied her closely and, after a moment, decided to bring up the elephant in the room. I know what happened with Uno today, she said, her voice softer now. Marina flinched at the mention of his name, her shoulders tensing. Silva told you, didn't he? Her voice was quiet, almost defeated. Irie nodded. Sis, don't waste another thought on him. You never even liked him, did you? She let out a small scoff. I always knew he was bad news. Marina was silent for a moment before nodding reluctantly. I just didn't know how to say no back then, she admitted, hugging her arms around herself. He confessed so suddenly, and I didn't want to hurt his feelings, so I agreed. Irie rolled her eyes. You're way too nice for your own good, sis. Then, a teasing smirk spread across her lips. That's why you need a man like Blake. Marina's head snapped up, eyes wide. What? Irie chuckled. Oh, come on. Don't think I haven't noticed how you've been looking at him. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a playful whisper. You like him, don't you? Marina's whole face turned crimson. No. I mean, he's your boyfriend. How could I? Kuzu. Sure, Irie drawled, clearly unconvinced. But it's okay, sis. I get it. Blake's, well, he's something else. She let out a dreamy sigh before shooting Marina a mischievous grin. And honestly, I wouldn't mind sharing. Marina nearly fell into the tub. Irie, what? He's amazing, and we both like him. Irie flicked some water at her sister. Besides, Blake could probably handle both of us. Marina gasped, scandalized. I can't believe you just said that. Irie giggled. Oh, please, like you haven't thought about it. She leaned in closer, her teasing tone turning sultry. Just imagine it. Sis, enough. Marina clamped her hands over her ears, refusing to listen any further. But despite her protests, a small, traitorous part of her mind entertained the thought for a second too long. Irie burst into laughter, thoroughly enjoying her sister's flustered state. All right, I'll stop. For now, she relented, raising her hands in surrender. Marina huffed, still red-faced, but a small smile tugged at her lips. The tension that had clouded her heart all evening began to fade, replaced by a newfound warmth. Irie tilted her head, watching her sister carefully before speaking again, this time more sincerely. Look, all I'm saying is, you deserve someone who makes you happy, sis. Whether it's Blake or someone else, don't settle for less. Marina blinked at her, then slowly nodded. Thanks, Irie. Of course. Irie grinned, reaching out to pull Marina into a warm hug. Now, enough sulking. Let's just enjoy a nice, relaxing bath together, okay? Marina chuckled softly, finally feeling at ease. All right. Irie suddenly moved again, pinning Marina down. Shockingly, her fingers slipped on her chest. Ah, Irie, stop it. Feeling a tingling sensation, Marina let out a startled cry. The book says doing it more than twice a day is bad for your health. Oh, what does that mean? You'll have to explain it to me thoroughly. And just like that, the sisters spent the rest of the night laughing and teasing each other, their bond stronger than ever. Chapter 16. Black Blade Gang. The next morning, at exactly 10 o'clock, Blake exhaled deeply, his crystalline blue eyes flickering with satisfaction. The divine energy within him had grown significantly, about half the strength of a low-class devil. In less than 4 days, he had achieved what would take others weeks, a testament to just how extraordinary his unique technique was. 10 already. That means it's the weekend, he muttered, glancing at the clock. Might as well take Irie and Marina out shopping. Marina's been through a lot. She could use the distraction. With that, Blake hopped out of bed, ran through his morning routine, and got dressed before heading straight to the Akazuki household. Standing at their doorstep, he knocked lightly. Through his heightened senses, he could tell both sisters were in the same room, their heartbeats slow and steady. A small smile tugged at his lips. Still sleeping? Huh, lazy little kittens, he murmured, amused. He decided to wait rather than knock again, enjoying the quiet morning. But then, a sharp, oppressive presence hit him from the distance. A wave of malice, thick and suffocating. Blake's gaze sharpened. Just as he tensed, footsteps echoed down the street, and a familiar voice, one dripping with venom, cut through the air. Well, if it isn't the silver-haired brat standing at my doorstep. How convenient. Kuzu Akazuki stepped into view, his once commanding presence now a shadow of itself. His face was gaunt, his expression twisted, and his voice, off. There was a high-pitched, hollow quality to it. Behind him stood 3 men dressed in sharp black suits and dark sunglasses. Their very presence reeked of blood and violence. They weren't ordinary thugs. They were predators. Each carried a gleaming machete at their side. He's the guy you needed backup for. One of them scoffed. Kuzu, you really are pathetic. Takahashi, don't underestimate him. Kuzu snapped, panic flashing in his eyes. Last time, he kicked my door down with 1 hit. The man named Takahashi, clearly the leader of the trio, snorted. Kicking a door. That's it. You're wasting my damn time. Blake crossed his arms, his icy gaze scanning the group before landing on Kuzu. If you're done with your little villain monologue, I'd appreciate it if you took this outside, he said coolly. I don't want you waking up my girlfriend. Otherwise, I'll make sure you're the ones crawling out of here. The street fell silent. The gangsters stiffened, their faces darkening at the sheer confidence in Blake's voice. You've got a death wish, kid, Takahashi sneered, lifting his machete. You really think you can stand up to the Black Blade Gang? The name sent a ripple of unease through the nearby onlookers. The Black Blade Gang was no small-time crew. 3 years ago, they were nothing but a ragtag group of criminals. But under their ruthless leader, Hideki Nozaki, they had absorbed rival factions one by one until they ruled the city's underworld with an iron grip. There was even a saying, it's better to piss off the mayor than cross the Black Blade Gang. And Blake, he'd just crossed them. Kuzu's lips curled into a twisted smirk. His life was already in ruins, his pride shattered. All he had left was revenge, no matter the cost. His eyes gleamed with hatred. I don't care what happens to me. I just want you dead, he spat. And as for my daughters, well, the boss only takes virgins, so I'll be taking Irie first. He won't mind. A crack filled the air. Blake's fingers clenched so tightly around the hilt of his blade that the air itself seemed to vibrate. His expression darkened to something unreadable. Then, he moved. Too fast to see. A gust of wind blasted through the street. A wet, meaty sound followed. Squelch. Clang. Takahashi's machete hit the ground. His right hand followed right after, severed clean at the wrist. A stunned silence fell over the street. Blake stood just inches away, his ice whisper sword gleaming, freshly painted red. For a moment, Takahashi didn't react. His brain refused to process what had just happened. Then, a blood-curdling scream tore from his throat as he clutched the stump where his hand used to be. Bastard. The remaining 2 gangsters snapped out of their daze, rushing Blake in blind fury, their machetes flashing in the morning light. Blake barely even acknowledged them. Squelch. 2 clean, precise strikes. The blades clattered to the ground, followed by 2 more severed hands. The gangsters staggered back, their faces contorted in agony, clutching their bleeding stumps. Their earlier bravado was long gone, replaced by sheer, unfiltered terror. They had underestimated the wrong man. Shut up, or I'll take your heads next, Blake muttered, his voice carrying the weight of a death sentence. The two gangsters bit down on their screams, sweat pouring down their faces as they fought to stay conscious. Takahashi, despite his injury, gritted his teeth and forced himself to speak. If you kill us, 100 of our brothers will come down on you. You and those two women will be chopped to pieces by morning. It was a desperate threat. A final attempt to scare Blake into letting them go. Blake sighed, shaking his head. Are you really that stupid? He asked. Then, without hesitation, squelch. He drove his sword straight through Takahashi's chest. The gang leader gasped, his eyes going wide. He stared at Blake, his lips moving soundlessly. This guy is a demon. Then, the light faded from his eyes, and his body slumped to the ground. The remaining two gangsters watched in silent horror. They had killed before. Many times. But even for them, taking a life had always been accompanied by adrenaline, fear, excitement, something. Blake, though. He had just killed a man as easily as someone swatting a fly. No hesitation. No emotion. It was the first time in their lives they had looked into a person's eyes and seen absolutely nothing. And that was more terrifying than anything they had ever known. Blake slowly turned to them, tilting his head. Well, do you still want to test your luck? Both men dropped to their knees, their bodies trembling. They didn't dare answer. Blake scoffed. Smart choice. Sheathing his sword, he finally turned his attention back to the Akazuki household, exhaling slowly. Guess that ruined the peaceful morning I had planned. Chapter 17. Storm brewing. Blake had always lived by one simple rule: leave no threats alive. Especially not the kind that dared to insult or threaten the people he cared about. To him, trash like that didn't even deserve to breathe. His piercing blue eyes locked onto Kuzu, who was frozen in place, his face drained of all color. The sheer brutality of what he had just witnessed had shattered any remaining bravado. He had wanted Blake dead, but seeing the bloodbath firsthand was something else entirely. Kuzu's mouth opened, but no words came out. His legs trembled violently, and with a strangled whimper, he crumpled to the ground. If not for the fact that he was already a eunuch, he would have soiled himself in terror. Blake didn't spare him a second glance. Instead, he flicked the blood off his Ice Whisper sword with a casual motion before sheathing it. His voice was as cold as steel when he spoke. Pick up the body. Grab the severed hands and weapons. We're leaving. The two remaining gangsters, both still clutching their bleeding wrists, flinched at his words. But when Blake's eyes flicked toward them, they scrambled to obey. Even Kuzu, shaking like a leaf, didn't dare hesitate. They were dead men walking if they disobeyed. A short while later, a black van peeled out of the alley, leaving behind a blood-soaked crime scene and a growing crowd of horrified bystanders. Inside the van, Blake leaned back against the seat, one hand on the hilt of his sword as he processed the situation. The Black Blade Gang. The biggest underworld force in the city. A pack of ruthless thugs that had been running unchecked for far too long. Blake had no illusions about what would happen if he left this matter unresolved. If he let them live, they'd keep coming for him. And worse, they'd set their sights on Irie and Marina again. That wasn't going to happen. Ha! Looks like I need to clean up the trash. A sharp glint flashed in Blake's eyes. His gaze shifted to one of the injured gangsters. Give me your phone. Call your boss. The man hesitated, his face drenched in sweat. Blake tilted his head slightly, expression unreadable. Don't make me repeat myself. The gangster jolted and hurriedly pulled out his phone, dialing a number with shaking fingers. Blake snatched it the moment the call connected. A deep, menacing voice came through the receiver. Hello, Takahashi. How's the job? Blake cut him off. You must be Hideki Nozaki, leader of the Black Blade Gang. His voice was calm, steady, completely unfazed. I'm Blake, your target. Silence. Then a low chuckle. Oh, you're alive. That's unfortunate. I could say the same for your men. Takahashi is dead. The others are missing their hands. Now, listen carefully. Blake's tone remained emotionless. I'll be waiting at the abandoned factory district on East Street. Come pick up what's left of your men. Click. He ended the call. The air in the van was suffocating. Even the two gangsters in the back were staring at him like he was the devil himself. Kuzu, drive faster, Blake ordered. Kuzu hesitated, but seeing the look in Blake's eyes, he swallowed hard and slammed his foot on the gas. He prayed, that the Black Blade gang would tear Blake apart when they arrived. It was his only chance at survival. Meanwhile, inside the Black Blade gang's headquarters, Hideki Nozaki sat in his luxurious suite, his scarred face twisted with rage. With a sudden roar, he grabbed the nearest glass bottle and hurled it at the wall, sending shattered glass flying across the room. That little bastard. The gang members standing nearby flinched at the sound of his fury. Hideki didn't give a damn about Takahashi and the others. They were disposable. But the sheer audacity of that kid. A no-name high schooler had not only slaughtered his men but had the nerve to challenge him directly. If he let this slide, his reputation in the underworld would be ruined. And that was unacceptable. Within minutes, Hideki had gathered over 100 of his men. Armed to the teeth with machetes, baseball bats, and even a few firearms, they piled into a fleet of blacked-out vans, engines roaring to life. The hunt was on. But what Hideki didn't realize was that he wasn't walking into a trap set for Blake. He was walking into Blake's slaughterhouse. And by the time the night was over, the Black Blade gang would never be the same again. Across the city, police radios crackled to life. Reports of gang activity, bloodied bodies, and a potential massive showdown had reached their ears. Patrol cars began mobilizing, sirens wailing in the night. Unknown to everyone, forces were converging on the abandoned factory district. The storm was about to break. And when it did, only one side would be left standing. Chapter 18. One man against 100. The abandoned industrial district of East Street was eerily silent, save for the distant hum of the city beyond. Blake sat atop a rusted van, one leg dangling over the edge, the other propped up lazily. He looked utterly at ease, as if he were simply waiting for a late-night rendezvous rather than an impending bloodbath. At his feet, the two surviving Black Blade members knelt, their hands bound with makeshift cloth restraints. Kuzu stood nearby, his face pale, shifting uneasily as if he might bolt at any second. Blake's fingers idly tapped against the hilt of his Ice Whisper sword, a ghost of a smirk playing at his lips. Then, he heard it. The low growl of engines, growing louder by the second. Blake's crystalline blue eyes lifted slightly, his smirk widening. They're here. A convoy of vehicles roared into view, their headlights slicing through the darkness. At the front was a sleek black sports car, its aggressive design screaming wealth and power. Behind it, 10 armored vans followed like a pack of wolves, their tires screeching as they came to a halt. The moment the engines died, the doors burst open. A tide of Black Blade enforcers spilled out, clad in dark clothing. Armed to the teeth with machetes, baseball bats, and hunting knives. Their faces were hardened, their eyes glinting with violence. Blake barely paid them any attention. His gaze was fixed on the man who stepped out of the sports car. Hideki Nozaki, the Black Blade's kingpin. A man whose name carried weight in the city's underworld. His face was lined with old scars, a testament to battles fought and survived. Dressed in a tailored black suit, he radiated menace, a predator in his domain. Two towering bodyguards flanked him, each wielding machetes nearly as long as a man's arm. Their sheer size made them look more like walking tanks than men. Then, without warning, ding! A system notification flashed across Blake's vision. Mission issued. Destroy the Black Blade gang. Reward. 100 fortune points. Blake blinked once, then dismissed it. Like I needed more reason to wipe these bastards out. Hideki strode forward, his gaze locked on the young man standing defiantly before him. Kid, he growled, his voice low and dangerous, you've got some nerve. Blake didn't respond, watching him with an unreadable expression. Hideki continued, stepping closer until only 10 feet separated them. You think kidnapping my men was a smart move? I'll give you one chance. Hand them over, kneel, and beg for mercy. If you do that, I might let you live. The Black Blade members behind him grinned, expecting to see Blake crumble. Instead, Blake let out a quiet chuckle. Arrogant. He tilted his head slightly. No, you're overestimating yourself. With a single, fluid motion, he leapt down from the van, landing with cat-like grace. His Ice Whisper sword gleamed under the flickering streetlights. To me, You're nothing but ants, Blake said coldly. And I brought you here to crush you. Before anyone could react. Slash. 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 The blade flashed. A heartbeat later, the two bound men and Kuzu collapsed, their heads rolling across the concrete. 3 kills. Instant. Precise. Merciless. The air was thick with the scent of blood. The severed necks gushed crimson, staining the ground beneath them. For a moment, the 100 gangsters stood in stunned silence. Even Hideki's face darkened. He had ordered Blake to release his men, not slaughter them like cattle. The blatant disrespect, the utter disregard for his authority, this was an open challenge. Then, ha 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 ha. Hideki's laughter echoed through the lot, rough and unhinged. He wiped a hand across his scarred jaw, eyes burning with fury. Good. Very good. He exhaled, his nostrils flaring. It's been a long time since anyone dared pull something like this in front of me. The grin vanished from his face. Kill him. Tear that bastard to pieces. The moment the words left his mouth, the Black Blade gang surged forward like a tidal wave. Blades gleamed. Boots thundered. Murder filled the air. But Blake. He simply exhaled. Pathetic. Then he moved. Slash. 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 A single step forward. 1, 2, 3, and the first 3 men fell, clutching their throats as blood poured from deep, precise cuts. The fourth barely had time to scream before Blake twisted around him, sword carving through his ribs like a hot knife through butter. He didn't stop. Blake darted between them, a phantom among men. His movements were flawless, fluid, an artist painting death with every stroke. 1 man. 10 men. 20 men. The ground became slick with blood and bodies. They outnumbered him 100 to 1, yet not a single blade touched him. To Blake, these thugs moved in slow motion. His perceptual distortion ability, his enhanced ether energy, his unnatural stamina, they made him untouchable. And the gangsters realized it too late. Their numbers didn't matter. Their weapons didn't matter. They were sheep in a slaughterhouse. From the sidelines, Hideki watched, his fingers twitching. The men he'd spent years training, his most loyal killers, were being butchered like they were nothing. And Blake. He wasn't even breathing hard. The blood on his sword wasn't a hindrance. The corpses piling up around him weren't slowing him down. If anything, he was enjoying it. For the first time in years, a cold chill ran down Hideki's spine. What the hell is this kid? As if sensing his fear, Blake turned his head slightly, locking eyes with him across the battlefield. The smirk returned. Chapter 19. Monster. The night air was thick with the stench of blood and fear. The abandoned factory, once filled with the thunderous roars of men ready for battle, had turned into a graveyard of the fallen. Blake stood at the center of it all, his frost whisper dripping crimson, its pristine blade now bathed in blood. His expression remained eerily calm, unbothered, as if the slaughter around him was nothing more than an inevitability. The Black Blade gang, once proud, once confident, now trembled like cornered animals. Their weapons shook in their hands. Their breath came in ragged, terrified gasps. This guy, he's not human. The same thought ran through their minds, over and over, clawing at what little sanity they had left. Even Hideki, their ruthless boss, felt the weight of it. These were his best men, hardened killers who had earned their reputations through blood and brutality. And yet, not one had even grazed Blake. How could a single man stand against 100 and emerge untouched? Blake took a slow step forward, his boots squelching in the pooling blood beneath him. His icy blue eyes scanned the remaining gangsters, sending chills through their spines. Weren't you going to destroy me? His voice was mocking, laced with an eerie calm. Why stop now? The few still standing flinched, some instinctively stepping back. But there was nowhere left to run. The air thickened, heavy with an aura so oppressive it crushed the last shreds of their will to fight. Some dropped their weapons entirely, their knees threatening to buckle. Hideki's face twisted, pale one second, livid the next. He had finally realized the ugly truth. They had kicked an iron wall. And now, that wall was coming down on them. A click. Then another. Blake's ears picked up the subtle sound of safeties being flicked off. His eyes narrowed. 16 of them have guns. The first volley of gunfire tore through the night. But Blake was already gone. Ducking, weaving. He moved like a specter, each bullet missing him by a breath. Then, swish, 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 swish. A blur of silver. 5 men dropped, heads rolling, their lifeless bodies slumping to the ground, still clutching their weapons. The surviving gunmen froze, their hands trembling on the triggers. What? It was impossible. They had him surrounded, aimed, and yet, before they could even pull the trigger a second time, he had already killed 5 of them. The next second, he vanished again. A flicker in the darkness. Then, the wet sound of steel piercing flesh. One after another, the remaining gunmen fell, their choked gasps the only sounds before their bodies hit the blood-soaked ground. To the rest of the gang, it was as if death itself was walking among them, cutting down lives with each silent step. And suddenly, the panic set in. Run! One of them screamed, his voice cracking. Like a broken dam, the last of the Black Blade members turned and bolted, their weapons clattering to the ground. Their only thought now was escape. And Hideki Nozaki. He was already gone. The moment he realized the truth, he had spun on his heels and fled into the night. The great underworld boss, the feared kingpin of Black Blade, was running like a scared dog. All his power, all his men, useless. A sword that moved faster than bullets. That wasn't something Hideki could fight. That wasn't something anyone could fight. No, this was beyond human. And so, his one and only thought was simple. Survive. He would leave the city, go into hiding, disappear completely. Living in the same city as this creature was too terrifying. But the moment that thought crossed his mind, a voice whispered behind him. Where do you think you're going? Hideki's blood ran cold. His eyes went wide, his breath catching in his throat. And then, slash. A blinding arc of silver cut through the night. For a split second, Hideki felt nothing. Then, the pain hit. His legs, gone. His body hit the ground, skidding across the concrete, blood pouring from the severed stumps where his legs had once been. The agony was unbearable. And then he screamed. A sound so raw, so filled with pain, it echoed through the empty factory, mingling with the silence left in Blake's wake. Blake stood over him, expression blank, watching as Hideki writhed in his own blood. A kingpin reduced to nothing. He slowly crouched down, tilting his head slightly. You should have known, Blake murmured, voice low and calm. Some things in this world, you just shouldn't provoke. Hideki shuddered, his body convulsing in pain. But Blake. He just smiled. And raised his sword one last time. Chapter 20, Cold-Blooded. Spare me, please. I'll give you everything. The Black Blade, my men, just let me live. The once mighty Hideki Nozaki was reduced to nothing. He lay in a growing pool of his own blood, his severed legs twitching, his face twisted in agony. Dignity, power, they meant nothing now. Survival was all that mattered. Slash. Blake didn't respond. Instead, he drove his sword through both of Hideki's hands, pinning them to the ground like an insect on display. Another blood-curdling scream tore through the night. Hideki's body convulsed, the pain unbearable. His once proud hands, the hands that had orchestrated countless murders, betrayals, and power plays, were now utterly useless. Escape was no longer an option. Blake pulled his blade free, the crimson-streaked steel gleaming under the factory lights. He turned away, his work not yet finished. More screams rang out in the distance. Raw, desperate wails that echoed through the industrial district. One by one, Blake hunted them down, his movements silent, merciless, efficient. Minutes later, the last straggler lay at his feet, his lifeless body still warm. Blake spun his sword once, flinging the excess blood off the blade, painting crimson arcs on the concrete. Then, with a practiced motion, he sheathed it, turning back toward the carnage he had left behind. The Black Blade was finished. Standing over Hideki's trembling form, Blake's icy gaze bore into him. Make a call, he ordered. Summon every last Black Blade member to the main hall. I might consider letting you live. Hideki's eyes lit up with sudden hope. You'll really let me go? His voice was weak, desperate. Blake's hand tightened around the black handgun he had taken from Hideki, raising it slightly. Stop wasting time. His voice was impatient, cold. The thick, suffocating aura of death that surrounded him made Hideki's entire body tremble uncontrollably. He had no doubt. This man would kill him without a second thought. Shaking fingers dialed a number. Godu. It's me. He forced his voice to stay steady, masking his terror. Order every Black Blade member to assemble at hall immediately. I don't care what they're doing. If they don't show, they'll answer to the first rule. The voice on the other end stammered a panicked confirmation. Hideki exhaled sharply, hanging up. He looked up at Blake with a forced, pathetic smile, like a man clinging to a last lifeline. And then, bang. A single gunshot. The bullet tore through Hideki's skull, snuffing out his life in an instant. His body slumped, eyes still wide with shock. Why? Why kill him? After he obeyed, Blake's expression remained unreadable as he tossed the gun aside. To still beg for life at this point, he let out a quiet scoff. Pathetic. He turned away, stepping over Hideki's corpse as if it were nothing more than discarded trash. Finding a supply of motor oil from the factory's forgotten storage, he doused the bodies. The sharp scent of gasoline filled the air. A flick of a lighter. The fire roared to life, consuming the remains of over 100 men. Without a second glance, Blake slid into Hideki's luxury black sports car, its sleek leather interior still reeking of expensive cologne and blood. With a smooth turn of the wheel, he disappeared into the night. 10 minutes later, a convoy of police cars screeched to a stop outside the abandoned factory. What they found inside stopped them cold. Flames devoured the corpses, casting dancing shadows on the blood-soaked walls. The officers stared in horror. Some staggered back, bile rising in their throats. A few turned and vomited outright. The Black Blade group had been under surveillance for some time. The police had been preparing for a large-scale raid. But this was something else. The captain stepped forward, his face grim. Captain, these are confirmed Black Blade members, an officer reported, his voice tight. Looks like a turf war. The captain frowned. A turf war. But who else could match Black Blade in this city? No answer came. Because deep down, they all knew the truth. This wasn't the work of a rival gang. This was the work of one man. And that thought sent a chill through every officer present. Meanwhile, as the police tried to make sense of the massacre, Blake had already moved on to the next phase. Using the car's GPS, he pinpointed the Black Blade's main headquarters. Pulling up to the lavish building, he took a moment to observe it. Golden lights, intricate carvings, grand pillars. A monument to wealth and arrogance. A slow smirk spread across his lips. Leaving the roots intact only invites trouble. 2 young guards stood at the entrance, their postures relaxed, expecting to see their boss step out of the luxury car. Instead, they saw a silver-haired stranger, dressed in black, stepping out with a sword in hand. Their confusion turned to alarm. Who the hell or why? Swish. 2 clean strikes. The guards didn't even have time to scream. A thin red line appeared across their throats. Then, blood sprayed, and their bodies crumpled, choking on their own lifeblood. Blake didn't slow down. He stepped over their corpses without a second thought, his expression devoid of emotion. After killing so many, he had long since stopped wasting time on unnecessary effort. There was only one thing left to do. End the Black Blade. Completely.
Another tale fades into the silence. But here, in the fantasy audiobook library, stories never sleep. Subscribe, and return when your heart seeks adventure. We'll be waiting.